You're listening to Zodiac Speaking, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Scene of the Crime, 3 Men and a Mystery, and All Things Crime. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
This is the Zodiac speaking. On December 3rd, 2020, Dave Aranchak, Jarl Van Eyck, and Sam Blake finally cracked the 51-year-old unbroken 340 cipher that has baffled experts and amateurs alike. The 340 cipher was designed in more complex fashion, split into 9 in 2 rows, using a period 19 shift. The deciphered message read, "I hope you're having lots of fun and trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show." Which brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner, because I now have enough slaves to work for me, where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise. So they are afraid of death. I am not afraid, because I know that my new life will be an easy one in paradise death. The solving of the cipher inevitably opened up a new debate on the intelligence of the Zodiac, with some using the technique employed by the Zodiac as proof of his high intelligence. However, what we do know about ciphers is that it isn't particularly difficult to encode a message such as this, but can often be extremely difficult to crack, especially when the Zodiac made mistakes when he applied the period 19 shift to his encoding process. The Zodiac had a propensity to reply to recent newspaper articles about him. So when the team of codebreakers unearthed the part of the message referencing the gas chamber, they spotted a chink of light within the armory of the 340 cipher. On October 23, 1969, just over 2 weeks before the 340 cipher was mailed to the San Francisco Chronicle, they released an article titled, "A TV Runaround with Zodiac Calls," referring to the hoax caller who appeared on the Jim Dunbar TV show. The article stated, "Belli told Sam he'd attempt to get a promise from District Attorney John J. Ferdin that Zodiac would be spared the gas chamber if convicted of murder." The San Francisco Chronicle ran a second article on October 24th, 1969, which contained headlines on page 1 and 2. They read, "That wasn't Zodiac, say 3 who know," and "It wasn't Zodiac, say 3 who know." It appears that the Zodiac replied directly to these headlines by encoding the contemporary message of "that wasn't me on the TV show" into his cipher. Not only was the message contemporary in nature, suggesting that the Zodiac expected his cipher to be solved fairly quickly, but it utilized part of the San Francisco Chronicle headlines. This is extremely important when we consider the widespread notion of a killer who supposedly only created 4 ciphers, 2 of which remain officially unbroken.
The Zodiac Killer's 340 cipher was inspired by the hoax caller to the Jim Dunbar show when he encoded a contemporary message using the headlines of the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper. Despite the 340 cipher being unbroken in the May of 1971, the author of the 148-character cipher and letter mailed on May the 3rd, 1971, or shortly thereafter, was also inspired by the hoax caller to the Jim Dunbar show when he encoded a contemporary message using the headlines of another San Francisco Chronicle newspaper article. On February the 6th, 1970, the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper ran an article entitled "Talk Show's Zodiac Caller Called a Phony," stating, "Sam the Sham telephoned the KGO TV talk show again yesterday morning and repeated his claim that he is the killer called Zodiac, and that Homicide detectives later listened to a tape recording of the conversation and concluded that Sam was a phony. The Zodiac Killer had long claimed the brutal murders of Kathy Snoozy and Deborah Furlong in San Jose on August 3, 1969, when he added August to his dripping pen card total on November 8, 1969. So it would be no surprise that when Carl Francis Werner was arrested and interviewed for their murders on April 29, 1971, along with the recent murder of Kathy Biek, the Zodiac Killer would very quickly mail another cryptogram encoding the message, "Stop listening to phonies," using the headlines from the February 6, 1970 Chronicle article entitled, "Talk Show's Zodiac Caller Called a Phony." The collective phonies he was referring to were Eric Wheel and Carl Francis Werner, urging police to stop listening to them. The author of the 148-character cipher could not have known the message encoded in the 340 cipher if they were not the Zodiac Killer, yet they also managed to encode a contemporary message responding to a San Francisco Chronicle newspaper headline by stating, "Stop listening to phonies," in similar fashion to "That wasn't me on the TV show." In both instances, the encoded message was calling out an imposter or phony. The Zodiac Killer was telling the truth in the 340 cipher when he called out Sam as an imposter, but in the 148-character cipher, his protestations that Carl Francis Werner was a phony were most definitely a lie. Regardless, this goes to show that the Zodiac Killer was still writing to the newspapers into the middle of 1971 and beyond, when a further communication was mailed, dubbed the Monticello card, which was mailed on July 13th, 1971, attempting to reaffirm the notion he was responsible for the deaths of Kathy Snoozy and Deborah Furlong by cryptically inserting the name of Kathy Biek into his latest communication.
The full decoded message of the 148-character cipher read, "This is the Zodiac speaking. Why can't you stop me? I can't stop killing. Stop listening to phonies. If this is not on the front page in a week, I will skin 3 little kids and make a suit from the skin." The cryptogram had reverted back to simple homophonic substitution like the 408 cipher. So if the 148-character cipher had been designed by the Zodiac, then this may have been a response to the inability of codebreakers to unravel the message he encoded in the 340 cipher, effectively wanting the 148-character cipher to be deciphered fairly quickly, and not lose another contemporary message to the wind. This cipher differed from the 408 and 340 ciphers, in that it wasn't structured uniformly, in 17-character rows. In fact, individual words didn't travel from one row to another, but were contained on each line of 21, 21, 24, 23, 25, 23, and 11 characters. One would have thought that a remotely decent hoaxer who crafted a cryptogram of more than one line would have used the 17-row lines used by the Zodiac, but clearly this author wasn't attempting to imitate the Zodiac. We know of one person who doesn't need to imitate the Zodiac, and that's the Zodiac himself. There's a further example of this in the letter accompanying the cipher, when the author uses a sun cross instead of the Zodiac crosshairs to sign the letter, something that would be easy to mimic for any would-be hoaxer. The sun cross itself was used in the cipher to represent the letter Z, so one could argue that the Zodiac signed his communication with the letter Z just like the Halloween card mailed on October 27, 1970. The dripping pen card stated, "P.S. Could you print this new cipher on your front page?" misspelling the word front by using the letter U, which the 148-character author again failed to imitate by spelling the word front correctly in their cipher, by stating, "If this is not on the front page in a week, I will skin 3 little kids and make a suit from the skin." The author of the 148-character cipher would again harvest the headlines of newspapers and integrate them into his cipher, other than the phrase, "Stop listening to phonies." 3 recent newspaper headlines about the capture of Carl Francis Werner were on April 30th and May 1st, 1971, stated, "San Jose student held in slaying of 3 girls," and "Youth arraigned in knife slaying of 3 girls." The author of the 148-character cipher would utilize these headlines and threatened further action by promising to skin 3 little kids if the newspapers failed to publish his latest offering. The 148 and 340 character ciphers not only enciphered contemporary messages, but both were direct responses to recent newspaper articles, and littered with language heavily borrowed from the headlines accompanying those articles. This may very well suggest the signature of one individual for both cryptic messages.
Other than the introduction cipher of 408 characters on July the 31st, 1969, the 340 and 148 character ciphers both contained a contemporary message related to the Jim Dunbar TV show. We could take this knowledge and extend it to the unbroken 38 character cipher on December the 7th, 1969. The reason for believing that the 38 character cipher also contained a contemporary message about the Jim Dunbar TV show is that a few hours after the 38 character cipher was created by its author, somebody rang the KTOK radio station in Oklahoma doing an awfully good impression of Sam, who called into the Jim Dunbar TV show. This opens up the very real possibility that the letter writer and phone caller on December the 7th, 1969 were the same person, and both were the Zodiac Killer. As stated before, the author of the December the 7th letter used the same 4 characters as the 340 cipher to begin his cipher, and used the same 5 characters as the 340 cipher to end his cipher. Both the 4 and 5 characters spelled English words before the period 19 shift was applied to the 340 cipher. One would also have expected a hoaxer to keep intact the near-Zodiac characters at the foot of the 340 cipher, but the author of the December the 7th cipher failed to do this, splitting this up and adding the final 2 characters of the 340 cipher, which spelled the word death in both the Z38 and Z340. But the crucial element of the December the 7th letter is the plea for help, effectively mocking the hoax caller to the Jim Dunbar TV show. The author of the December the 7th letter wrote, "I just need help," mimicking Sam, the hoaxer, on the very same day somebody mimicked Sam in a phone call to an Oklahoma radio station. Many will claim the possibility of the hoax caller to the Jim Dunbar TV show being the same person who claimed to be Zodiac in the call to the Oklahoma radio station. If that were the case, then Sam the hoaxer would have been very lucky to have placed a call to Oklahoma just hours after the mailing of the December the 7th letter that stated, "I just need help," which was never released to the newspapers, but was mimicked by the real Zodiac Killer in writing just 13 days later when he thrice stated, "Please help me," in the Melvin Belli letter on December the 20th, 1969. Notwithstanding the fact that the 38 character cipher revealed the word death at the end of the code, just like the 340 cipher. If the caller to the Oklahoma radio station wasn't the Zodiac Killer, then his timing was impeccable, placing the phone call just hours after the December the 7th, 1969 letter, which, as demonstrated, almost certainly had to be authored by the Zodiac Killer. When the 340 cipher was cracked, despite the marvellous achievement of Dave Aranchak, Jarl Van Eyck, and Sam Blake, most internet sleuths were disappointed that the message would only reveal more ramblings by the Zodiac Killer, although that is what most probably expected to be there. However, the 340 cipher has effectively authenticated several more once-questioned Zodiac letters, such as the 148 character cipher, which effectively mirrored the message in the 340 cipher by calling out an imposter in both instances. But as already stated, the only imposter or phony in 1971 was the Zodiac Killer himself, defiantly attempting to maintain his involvement in the Snoozy and Furlong murders, now attributed to Carl Francis Werner.
The solving of the 408 and 340 ciphers have taught us that the Zodiac Killer did indeed place legitimate and legible text within his messages, Yet despite this, many internet sleuths are still producing solutions that need decoding a second time because of the nonsensical pidgin English they claim to unearth. The solutions to the remaining ciphers, although not impervious to spelling errors, will almost certainly contain a readable message without the requirement of further explanation. If the Zodiac took the headlines and text from recent newspaper articles about him and incorporated them into his enciphered messages in the 340 and 148 character ciphers, then there's an argument to be made that he did the same with the 38 character code on December 7, 1969. Obviously, there will be differing opinions on the validity of the 148 character and 38 character ciphers, but that shouldn't be a barrier to examining these communications, rather than dismissing them out of hand on nothing more than looking at handwriting. Dave Aranchak, Jarl Van Eyck, and Sam Blake remained undaunted in their pursuit of a solution for the 340 cipher. Despite the claims of many that the 340 cipher most likely contained no message, designed by the killer to give people some quote-unquote busy work, and nothing more. That dogged determination bore fruit on December 3rd, 2020, and changed many people's perception of the remaining ciphers, and significantly increased the belief in the Zodiac community that the 32-character and 13-character codes would indeed harbor hidden and understandable messages. In the letters to the San Francisco Chronicle, San Francisco Examiner, and Vallejo Times-Herald on July 31st, 1969, the Zodiac supplied a third portion of cryptogram, in which he explicitly referred to all three as ciphers, stating in the Chronicle, "Here is part of a cipher. The other two parts of this cipher are being mailed to the editors of the Vallejo Times and San Francisco Examiner." When the Zodiac mailed the 340 cipher on November 8, 1969, he again referred to his cryptic offering as a cipher, stating, "P.S. Could you print this new cipher in your front page?" But when he mailed his 32-character offering on June 26, 1970, he specifically referred to it as a code, stating the map coupled with this code will tell you where the bomb is set. 1 month later, he would reiterate this concept, stating, "The Mount Diablo code concerns radians and inches along the radians." This time he twice used the word code, accompanying his latest cryptic puzzle, rather than the word cipher that accompanied his 408 and 340 cryptograms. This opens up the possibility that the decoding process required for solving the 32-character cipher lies on a totally different method, and bolstered by the fact that out of the 32 characters the Zodiac supplied us with, we have 29 unique and distinct characters evident. The distinction between cipher and code should not be underestimated when we consider the design of the Zodiac Killer's June 26, 1970 offering.
It is without doubt the wording in the 340 cipher message was inspired by recent newspaper articles with the Zodiac Killer declaring, "That wasn't me on the TV show," and "I am not afraid of the gas chamber." So the design of the 340 cipher may also have its roots in the newspapers, possibly the San Francisco Chronicle or San Francisco Examiner. On October the 22nd, 1969, the San Francisco Examiner newspaper published an article by Will Stevens, which laid down a challenge from Professor D.C.B. Marsh of the American Cryptogram Association to the Zodiac Killer, attempting to coax him into revealing his name. Within the article, it quoted Dr. Marsh as saying, "He knows, to quote Edgar Allan Poe, that any cipher created by man can be solved by man. Zodiac has not told the truth in his cipher messages to the Examiner, the Chronicle, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Zodiac has not done this because to tell the complete truth in relation to his name in cipher code would lead to his capture. It is therefore strange that the essay by Edgar Allan Poe entitled A Few Words on Secret Writing first covered the solving of ciphers using the Skytail method of decryption, which can be used to decode the message in the 340 cipher. So, is it coincidental that one of Edgar Allan Poe's famous poems about the death of his beloved wife was entitled To One in Paradise? bearing in mind that the encrypted message at the end of the Zodiac Killer's 340 cipher read, "Life will be an easy one in paradise, death." The poem was written after the death of Poe's wife. He writes that she was his life and he lived for her, and now he looks forward to the future where they will be together again in death. Therefore, it is arguable that Dr. Marsh laid the seed in Zodiac's head to choose a method of encryption featured by Edgar Allan Poe by referring to Edgar Allan Poe within the challenge in the Examiner article. The Zodiac Killer then took up this challenge by using the Skytail method of encryption from Poe's famous essay, while simultaneously encoding the words "one in paradise" from Edgar Allan Poe's poem lamenting the death of his wife. If this seems unlikely, then I hope you will visit the essay A Few Words on Secret Writing by Edgar Allan Poe and scroll down to the second form of cipher encryption featured in this essay, and note the similarities to the Zodiac Killer's cipher offering on April the 20th, 1970, when he gave us the 13-symbol cipher. This short code was introduced by the wording, "This is the Zodiac speaking. By the way, have you cracked the last cipher I sent you? My name is..." Many believe this is a direct response to Dr. Marsh's challenge laid down in the San Francisco Examiner on October the 22nd, 1969, which carried the headline entitled, "Cipher Expert Dares Zodiac to Tell Name." So one can see that both the 340 and 13-symbol ciphers have a connection to the October the 22nd, 1969 San Francisco Examiner article featuring Dr. Marsh, thereby posing us the question, can the 13-symbol cipher message be unearthed using the methodology detailed in Edgar Allan Poe's A Few Words on Secret Writing, just like the 340 cipher message can be unearthed using the Skytail method of decryption?
This is the Zodiac speaking.
Well, first, Mike, I would like to say congratulations to Dave Aranchak, Jarl Van Eyck and Sam Blake on their solving of the 340 cipher in December 2020. It was a marvellous achievement, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's it's not easy. It takes a lot of patience and effort to do something like that, and they stuck with it. And a lot of people over the years had tried and failed, and they were successful. So it's really cool to see that. Now, I think a lot of us were hoping that somehow there'd be something really tantalizing in there as far as a clue or an identity to who Zodiac was, but it was pretty lukewarm as far as an actual message from Zodiac. So I wonder what the guys thought when they finally solved it, that it was not a huge earth-shattering reveal from Zodiac.
I think we all half expected it not to really carry any significance. We thought it might be similar to his 408, just a bunch of ramblings.
Now, see, I was hoping, I didn't think he would put his name in there, but I thought he would put something in there of real interest, because it was so hard to solve for so long. I thought maybe that he really did hide something in there that, if it was revealed, would tell us something. I didn't think it would be his name, but I was a little bit disappointed when I saw what it actually did reveal.
Well, we'll get into that in a little while, talking about what it actually has uncovered to a certain extent. But I was taking a look at the inspiration behind the 340 cipher, and it's my belief, Mike, that Dr. Marsh in the Examiner on October the 22nd, 1969, brought up the quote of Edgar Allan Poe to trigger Zodiac into using a cipher technique by Poe. The first thing discussed in the essay, can you look up A Few Words on Secret Writing on the internet? Have you got that available?
Sure.
Right. The first thing discussed in the essay at the very top of A Few Words on Secret Writing by Poe was the Skytala method, he called it, which is a Skytail method of encryption that can be used to crack the 340. I don't think Dave Aranchak believes that that was strictly used, but you can put the cryptogram into the Skytail method and it does reveal the answer to the 340. And it was curious that this was at the top of Poe's A Few Words on Secret Writing. So I looked a little bit further and I found that the title of one of Poe's famous poems was called To One in Paradise, about his dead wife, which can be largely found in the solution when Zodiac wrote, "Life will be an easy one in paradise." Now, when we scroll down the essay by Poe, if you scroll down a little bit further, we have an alphabet split into two halves, similar to Zodiac's next cipher on April the 20th, 1970. It begins with A and ends with M. Can you find that?
I'm looking right now. Yep, I found it.
Yeah, he splits that up. And if you look at the April the 20th letter, it is 13 characters. It does begin with A and end in M, just like it is in that A Few Words on Secret Writing. If the Zodiac was to mail this letter on the 20th like he did, he might have expected it to arrive by the 21st, is my guess. So if you scroll down a little bit further, well, quite a bit further down the page, you will find the date of April the 21st.
Wow, and that lines up with almost the...
Now, I don't believe this. I don't know if this is all coincidence, but it's curious nonetheless that his next cipher was the 13-symbol cipher. So my question to you is, do you think that is sheer coincidence, or do you think there's a possibility that he may have used a technique somewhere in that document that you're reading now?
Well, the date is certainly of interest, and I think Zodiac, again, whether he's an expert or not, was someone who was aware of ciphers, whether you learn them through some kind of training or magazines, or maybe was a member of a cipher solving society. I think he had an interest and may very well have been someone that would be aware of this letter and the date of it, especially. So that's interesting. But I think he also was someone that paid attention to the newspapers. So when he sees a challenge maybe from Marsh, as you mentioned, maybe that was something that he took him up on and was inspired by that. And I think it's possible that maybe this method is something that he tried to use.
What were your thoughts originally on the 340? Did you think it contained a message, or did you believe that maybe it was just gibberish?
So do you mean, or before it was solved, before it
was solved, did you have the feeling that it was just a fake cipher that had no message at all, just to keep people busy? Or do you think you always had the belief that it contained a message, a bit like probably Dave did, because he wouldn't have pursued it so long?
I thought that it included some kind of message. I think Zodiac was someone who was bragging all the time. He wanted people to listen to him. He wanted people to pay attention to him. So I always thought there was something in there as a message from him. I thought it was going to be something more compelling and interesting, and maybe some clues. But nonetheless, I thought that he had something in there that he was trying to tell people.
When the Zodiac sat down to encrypt this 340 cipher, it's logical to conclude he wrote down the alphabet and assigned various ciphertext symbols to each letter of the alphabet. If this was done randomly, how is it that we can use the mechanics of cryptology and spell paradise and slaves in a 17 by 17 formation in crosshair style on the canvas of the 340 on the actual outside of the cipher itself? Also, if he allocated ciphertext characters to plaintext letters randomly, what are the odds that the near Zodiac pseudonym would appear on the bottom line of the cipher? So, do you think this canvas design was designed deliberately?
Yeah, I don't know enough about that aspect of it. When there's things that line up, though, as coincidence, I wonder when things fit perfectly, is it coincidence or is there something to it? In the Zodiac case, there's a lot of things that are, coincidence they turn out to be. I think someone coined the name synchronicity for that. And this could be one of those things. But then again, knowing Zodiac, maybe he drew on this as some kind of inspiration.
The reason I ask is if you know what I mean, you can spell paradise going down 17 from the exact center of the cipher. and slaves, where the 2 dashes are on the 10th line.
Yeah.
And all the characters that can spell paradise, including the 2 pluses where you'd have A, something A, exactly mimic the canvas appearance of the cipher. Now, the idea is that he designed this message on the outside and on the inside, making it a sort of dual cipher. The reason I bring this up is, what other purpose could there be for the design of the Halloween card where he mimicked this if it isn't connected to the 340 cipher? The design on the Halloween card would be meaningless. So what was the point of that design on the Halloween card, if not to prompt us into seeing that message on the outside of the 340 cipher?
Well, you bring up a good point. I think there were little clues that Zodiac may have put in some of his writings, whether it be, as you're mentioning, the slaves in paradise with the way it was, they cross sort of each other. Or, one other thing that just comes to mind in the letter to Paul Avery, he sort of underlined that LAV. I think that wasn't done by accident. I think he's trying to draw attention to something. I don't know what that is, but I think he was all about trying to give little hints because he wanted it, again, in my opinion, he wanted people to know what he was saying. He wanted to be heard. He wanted the attention. So I think he would give little hints to help people along, and they didn't always get them, obviously.
You found something recently on the Halloween card, haven't you?
Well, yeah. Just today, for example, over the weekend, I received a tip from someone that told me that I should look at, the Halloween. One of the symbols was very similar to something called a Bat Creek stone, which I had never heard of. And, so when I looked at it, I looked at the image, I looked it up online, and I was like, wow, that's interesting. And sure enough, this symbol is very similar to Zodiac's symbol in the Halloween card that he sent to Avery. And I just, I said, well, what would make Zodiac pull this out of all things? Why would he use this on October, that October mailing that he did to Paul Avery? And sure enough, I looked it up, and there was an article that ran, it was October 19th. It was in the Sacramento Bee. It was in the LA Times. And there was an article about that very stone, and it ran on the AP. And that symbol, just days before, Avery gets this card, to me, it doesn't seem like a coincidence. So, this tip is what, led me to look at this stone. Now, come to find out, I have since looked, and there are other people that have mentioned this stone in the past. So I'm not the first one, and this person that sent the tip isn't the first one. People talked about this stone before as possibly being a match. But what I think I verified was that it was in the newspapers within days of Avery getting that mailing. So to me, that's too much of a coincidence. I think that it's very possible that this symbol is from that stone, and that Zodiac had read this article and for whatever reason chose to send this to him. And it's something that it's like a secret message. It's something that Zodiac would probably be interested in. So I could see him, drawing on this stone.
What was the inspiration for him choosing that image, do you think, within the Halloween card itself?
I don't know. Again, I think there's a message there. I just don't know how to decipher it. And I think, looking at some of the dots around the little symbol, for example, that he included, and around the Z, there's little dots. That's very indicative of Freemasonry codes, like a pigpen cipher, of a Freemason's pigpen cipher. And I think those things combined with that symbol from that stone, if you knew how to solve that, would probably reveal something. And again, I don't know. I'm no expert on that stuff. I haven't found anyone that can help put those things together and decipher this. But I really think that there's a message there of some sort. It may be, it may be something that if you figure it out, it's nothing big. It's just a little rant from him. But I think there's something there. I don't think he just made symbols just to make symbols. I think that he had a message hidden there.
Most people know about the X design on the envelope saying, sorry, no cipher. So all along, people have thought there may be a hidden message within that Halloween card.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And I think, if maybe some experts could be consulted that know about the messages on the stone or Freemasonry. They might be able to help decipher a message there. Now, the Freemasons are pretty secretive, so I don't know that anyone within their organization would be willing to really go into detail and find out what the meaning of this might be. But who knows? It might be worth going down the avenue to pursue to see if someone could help figure this message out.
Now, as mentioned in the introduction, the Zodiac Killer took the newspaper headlines of "That Wasn't Zodiac, Say Three Who Know," and enciphered it into "It Wasn't Me" on the TV show in the 340. In 1971, he again took the headlines from a newspaper of talk show Zodiac caller a phony and enciphered "Stop Listening to Phonies" in his message. Both ciphers were contemporary messages, and both were referring to the Jim Dunbar TV show, as far as I can gather. When Zodiac stated "That wasn't me" on the TV show, he was effectively saying that Eric Wheel wasn't the Zodiac. When he wrote "Stop Listening to Phonies" in the 148 character cipher, he was effectively saying that Eric Wheel wasn't Zodiac, along with Carl Francis Werner, who he collectively called Phonies, who he claimed wasn't responsible for the murders of Snoozy and Furlong. The 148 character cipher was designed before the 340 was broken, yet both contained a message about October the 22nd, 1969. What are your thoughts on this cipher?
Again, I don't know about the cipher itself, why he chose to use those things that he did, but the messages there, connected to them, it seems definitely like Zodiac. I think Zodiac is someone that, no doubt about it, read the newspapers, followed along the headlines, and when there was reports of Zodiac or someone claiming to be Zodiac calling into the Jim Dunbar show, he's certainly going to respond to something like that. He's not going to let someone steal his thunder and steal his attention. So I think it was naturally an opportunity for him to reach back out and include a message saying "That wasn't me" on the radio show.
Because we also know he responded to the headlines by Dr. Marsh when Dr. Marsh dared Zodiac to tell us his name. We know that on April the 20th, 1970, again, he tempted us with his name within that communication. So the "My Name Is" letter may have been derived from the headlines of the October the 22nd Examiner article featuring Dr. Marsh as well. So he seemed to have a habit of picking up on newspaper articles, in particular the headlines of the newspaper articles, and incorporating them into his communications and ciphers.
Yeah, no doubt he was paying attention to what was going on in the news, and I think when he found a way to use it for his own device, he would do that, and he would sort of capture some of that attention that's out there. He would use it for himself.
Now, we know the Zodiac Killer was no fool. He took the time and patience to create a 408 and 340 cipher. He knew the basic workings of cryptography. Therefore, it must be highly unlikely he didn't know that two codes of 13 and 32 characters were designed in such a way as to be practically unsolvable. This, to me, is why he specifically referred to them as codes. There has to be an alternative route to decipherment. The Zodiac must have known that thousands of solutions could be placed in the 13-character cipher, for example, with no way to determine which is correct. I think we underestimate the Zodiac Killer's ability to comprehend this. Either way, a key exists in later communications, a clue lies in the text of the letter, or a different methodology is required to solve these later ciphers.
Yeah, I think there's something to that.
Do you think there's something behind him calling them codes? In both the other communications, the 340 and 408, he specifically referred to them within the letter. He referred to them as ciphers on both occasions, but in the Z13 and the Z32, they were both specifically referred to as codes. Do you think he knew the difference?
I think anyone that was knowledgeable about them, and whether he had training, whether he read about them in the book, I think it was easy to understand, to believe that he knew that ciphers and codes the word was interchangeable. So it's not surprising to me that he would refer to them as both ciphers and codes in some of his writings.
Now, if we switch a little bit, one thing we will look at in more detail in the upcoming podcasts is the November the 21st, 1969 letter to the San Jose Police Department, which followed the November the 8th dripping pen card, adding the 2 San Jose murders. This, we know, contained at least one short code of 6 characters of dash plus 62 plus dash. This was not released to the public, but was mirrored somewhat by another very short code in the December the 16th, 1969 Fairfield letter, again featuring San Jose in the total of 38 cops the author wanted to kill. This was again followed by a phone call on December the 19th, 1969, threatening to kill a family of 5 and 5 cops by Monday. This call was to the San Jose Highway Patrol. 3 separate references to San Jose, despite no explicit reference to San Jose in the dripping pen card, only the insinuation. Do you think this 6-character code was an aid to the 340 cipher or to the threat on the widow detailed in the FBI report? And have you found anything extra about this letter?
I've never found out anything more about the letter. And, again, I'd be guessing as if, to say that there was a code, it was part of something to use for his other work. But it seemed like no doubt there's a possibility that Zodiac could have been drawing attention to that area, San Jose, for whatever reason. Maybe he was spending time there. Maybe he had a connection there. Who knows? But I think, and I'd have to go back and look now, I think I even remember a bomb threat in San Jose. I may have the town wrong, but someone claiming to be Zodiac made a bomb threat. And I forget where the town is, but I want to say it's San Jose. I'm sure someone out there listening will be able to remember that. So he's definitely throwing out San Jose. If this is all Zodiac, real correspondence, and you believe that Fairfield letter is Zodiac, then, for whatever reason, he's calling attention to that city.
Do you think this was November the 21st? Because the FBI files are a bit vague on it, aren't they?
Yeah, and there's, we found errors in not only FBI files, but in police reports. I don't know how many errors, I found, right down to misspellings of victims' names. So there's definitely some issues. And again, there's people typing this stuff up and all of a sudden a number gets transversed or a word gets changed, a date gets changed. So I can see that happening, and all of a sudden there's a mistake there. And I don't know what is true on the date, but it all seems to center around the same general time frame.
The reason I bring it up is because Dave recently did a YouTube video featuring the Batman and the Riddler. And we both know, because you featured it on your forum, that the Riddler letters were sent on November the 19th, 1969, roughly the same time this letter was sent. So what are your thoughts on the Riddler letters?
Well, that's when I've always wanted to see the actual image of that letter, the text of it.
It would be nice, wouldn't it?
The writing, yeah. And it's just, I don't think we're ever going to get a chance to see that, unfortunately. But it seems to show a theme of Zodiac's interest in superhero versus supervillain, and he's the arch villain and the cops are the superhero, and he's going to outsmart them. So, Batman and the Riddler sort of is something that I picture him being interested in, almost like a juvenile interest in cops and robbers, good guy versus bad guy, that kind of thing. So to me, it's very possible that there's something there in that Batman and Riddler connection. And to see that letter would be interesting, if nothing else, just to see the handwriting, to see if it looks anything like what we know Zodiac's writing looks like. But unfortunately, I've tried to get that. I think others have tried to get that. And the FBI at this point has told me that they've released everything they're going to release in the case, everything that they have access to, supposedly. So, barring some kind of miracle, I don't think we're ever going to see that letter.
They detailed 2 slips of paper. One said, "Dear Gunny Kramer, this is Zodiac speaking. Take heed, Zodiac." And the other one said, "Dear Jim, here I am again. The Zodiac and the Riddler." I personally don't believe they're likely to be genuine, but bearing in mind the Batman and the Riddler connection, you just never know, do you?
Yeah, you never do. And back then, I think it could be common for people to just play a joke on each other, and all of a sudden someone takes it serious. They see Zodiac and they're calling the police and saying, "Hey, I got a mystery Zodiac letter," and meanwhile it's a prank from their friend. But I think there's reason they would have taken that serious, and it might just be something that was a harmless joke. On the other hand, it could be some kind of connection to the real Zodiac. That's why seeing the writing would at least be interesting, just to see if it looks anything at all like what we were used to seeing.
Do you know anything about the Marine Amphibious Force Base that it was supposed to have occurred at?
Not much, no.
Because it says it's in San Francisco. And I've got a document. I found out that the people mentioned in the slips or the notes were genuine people, because there's a document on my site featuring it. So these were real people he was presumably threatening within the base. But his access to this base would have been unlikely, wouldn't it?
Yeah, unless he was some kind of civilian working on the base in a civilian capacity, or if he was somehow in the military, he could have access. I tend to think he wasn't in the military, but he could have been on there as a reporter covering a story there and had press credentials. Could have been someone doing some service work of some kind, plumbing repairs or something where they needed to bring in supplies. So there are ways people could get onto a base and access it, even if they're not part of the base there and aren't normally there. But then again, if that's the case and there's someone that's there on a limited basis, how and why would they target someone specifically by name that's at the base? That part seems to lend it to either being a friend that's pulling a prank, or someone that is targeting a real person at the base for whatever reason.
Is that what you probably believe? It is a prank?
I guess that it's probably a prank, and there are other instances of other people in the Bay Area getting notes mentioning Zodiac or subtle hints that the letters from Zodiac, and I could just see a lot of people being panicked and being afraid at that time, because Zodiac was big news and he was a proven killer. So if you got a letter from someone claiming to be Zodiac, you took it seriously. I mean, it was big news. Even, I go back to the Equinox letter. Someone found that letter on the ground and turned it in because, the language in it sounded like it was from Zodiac, and Zodiac was big news, so they turned it in. And I located the identity of the person that wrote it and tracked him down, and I don't think he was Zodiac, although he did live in San Francisco and he looked similar to the sketch, but the writing wasn't much like him. But just that there proves that, I find a letter on the ground that mentions anything that even sounds Zodiac-esque, I'm going to turn it into the police. And I think that kind of thing is what happened during that time frame, because people were just on high alert and it was front page news.
That was Phil Glitzen, wasn't it?
Yeah, Philip Geitzen.
Geitzen, was it?
Geitzen.
Yeah, and he was certainly not the Zodiac, was he?
No, I don't think there's anything. I don't know that they ever looked at him. I don't know that they ever identified him. I identified him. I don't remember how many years ago. It was maybe 5-10 years ago now. I don't even remember. But I just the writing itself looked nothing like Zodiac to me. Although some of the stuff mentioned in the writing, I could see why someone might think it was connected to Zodiac. But I just think it proves that someone finds a letter mentioning Zodiac or that sounds like Zodiac, and they're turning into police out of caution.
You said earlier that you didn't believe that the Zodiac would leave his name within his communications or his cipher, or at least his full name anyway. So I looked up something about this the other day, and the Zodiac Killer's 408 cipher was solved fairly quickly. His 38 and 5 character codes in December 69 remain unbroken. By 1971, his 340 cipher, 32 character code, and 13 character code were unsolved. The 148 character cipher in 1971 was another contemporary message just like the 340, yet this one he designed much simpler, with other than the letter G just ascribed one symbol for one letter. There is every chance that after seeing 5 consecutive cryptic offerings go unsolved, he decided that this message wouldn't go unbroken. After all, it contains a much more important message. In the accompanying letter, the Zodiac stated, if you believe it's the Zodiac, "I'll never give my name." Therefore, this is a self-admission that looking for Zodiac's name in any previous communications, including the 13-symbol code, will be pointless. What are your thoughts on a likely name being somehow concealed in the writings or codes, which I think you've already answered emphatically that he would never do that?
Yeah, I think Zodiac was a coward, and although he acted like he was a supervillain and he'd outsmart the police, there's no chance he'd ever take of revealing his identity. Although I think he wanted the attention, he didn't want to be apprehended and found out. So, in my opinion, there's no way that he would have his real name in any correspondence. So, anything along those lines, I'm thinking he's not going to have his name in there.
What do you think about my idea when I suggested the solution to the 13-symbol cipher may be FK, I'm crack-proof? In other words, my name is FK, I'm crack-proof. He's giving us his initials and not his name.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have tried to make something out of that. Some people have used that same thing and said, well, maybe his last name is Steele, he's crack-proof. I think it's open to interpretation, and I think it's open to interpretation. I don't know if it's just a play on words, if he is trying to give a clue. I think anything's possible, Zodiac, but I just don't think that he would give anything that would clearly be a name. It might be a clue towards his name, a hint towards his name or who he is, but I don't think he'd give his actual name under any circumstances. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Zodiac Speaking. Please make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you're listening now, so you don't miss a single episode. New episodes of Zodiac Speaking will air every other Saturday. If you want to follow or interact with us on social media, we'd love to hear from you. You can find Zodiac Speaking on Twitter with the handle @PodcastZodiac, or you can search Facebook for Zodiac Speaking Podcast.
And don't forget, you can get plenty of Zodiac details 24/7 by visiting my site at zodiacciphers.com or by going to Mike's site at zodiackiller.net.
If you'd like to help more people find Zodiac Speaking, please take a moment to rate the show and leave a review of it on your favorite podcast player or app. As we wrap up this episode, Rich and I would like to play a preview of a true crime podcast we think you'll like. It's called True Crime Horror Story. Be sure to give it a listen. On behalf of Rich, this is Mike Morford, and I'd like to say thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Zodiac Speaking.
I am your host, JD Horror, and this is True Crime Horror Story, a true crime podcast designed like an anthology horror movie. It's definitely not for the faint of heart and never played for laughs. Listener discretion is strongly advised. In seasons 1 through 4, we highlighted both notorious and obscure incidents of real-life murder. From world-famous psychopaths like the Toolbox Killers and Jeffrey Dahmer, to lesser-known evils that you may not have heard of, but have effects just as catastrophic for the victims and their families. Season 5 is coming soon, so subscribe now wherever podcasts can be consumed, and check out our website at www.truecrimehorrorstory.com. True Crime Horror Story. Sometimes truth is more brutal than fiction.